11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else.
We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride.
Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse.
It's news, but it's this close to entertainment.
Patrick Christie tonight, 9 till 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, lovely people. I am Neil Oliver, and I was live the last time I looked. I'm on GB News TV and on radio. Tonight, I will be joined by farmer Gareth Wynne-Jones to talk about the ongoing protests by the farmers in Germany. For some farmers already struggling, paying for pollution is a step too far, and Germany is just the latest country to see the anger boil over. I'll then be joined by pundit and commentator James Melville, who says the situation in Scotland, as I well know, is little better and that something needs to be done before it's too late. And finally, I'll be joined by the author Laura Aboli. I've listened to a few of Laura's talks and I find her utterly inspiring. She says we have to take control of our world now to stop the big organisations from taking over once and for all. All of that and lots of chat with my panellist for this evening, my friend Ralph Schoellhammer. But first, let's go to Aaron for the latest news headlines.
Very good evening to you. I'm Aaron Armstrong. Norfolk Police has referred itself to the independent watchdog in relation to the deaths of 4 members of the same family on Friday. The force says it didn't respond to an emergency call made about an hour before the bodies of a 45-year-old man, a 36-year-old woman and 2 girls were discovered at a house near Norwich. All 4 were found with injuries. The force had already referred itself to the watchdog after officers were called to the same house last month as part of a missing person inquiry. Police say that will now be re-examined. A speech by the Shadow Foreign Secretary calling for a ceasefire in Gaza has been interrupted by pro-Palestinian protesters. David Lammy had to make a quick exit when a woman jumped on stage and called for him to condemn genocide in Gaza, shouting how many more children need to die. After the activists from the Free Palestine Coalition were escorted away, more people in the audience stood up to launch verbal attacks on Labour's stance on the Middle East conflict. Mr Lammy went on to express support for a Palestinian state when the war ends. He says everyone wants to see a sustainable ceasefire.
The situation in Gaza is intolerable and unbearable. Too many children, women, old people have lost their lives. We need a truce now so that humanitarian aid can get in. We need a sustainable ceasefire. I'm hugely worried about what I'm hearing from UK aid agencies and from the United Nations and the medical attention that over 60,000 people who are now wounded or maimed need. We must get urgent aid in.
Meanwhile, the US president has suggested a 2-state solution to the crisis in the Middle East may still be a possibility. Joe Biden spoke to Israel's Prime Minister on Friday a day after Benjamin Netanyahu rejected US calls for the establishment of a Palestinian state once the war's over. However, following their conversation, President Biden now says Mr. Netanyahu is not opposed to all versions of the proposal, suggesting one path could involve a non-militarised government. 2 British Royal Navy ships have been involved in a collision in a port in Bahrain. And no one was injured in the accident as one backed into another, and an investigation into it has been opened. The Royal Navy is working with the US Navy in the Gulf region to protect shipping in the Red Sea from increased attacks by Houthi rebels based in Yemen. Mail deliveries on Saturdays could become a thing of the past as Ofcom looks into ways of reforming the postal service. A spokesperson for the regulator told GB News they will publish a document next week on how Royal Mail can evolve to meet changing consumer needs. It comes as the company faces losses of £319 million for the first half of this financial year. Ofcom, though, says it's ultimately up to the government to decide if any changes to the service will be implemented. Tata Steel's pledged a £130 million support package to help workers retrain or find new jobs as it plans to close furnaces at its Port Talbot site. Up to 2,800 jobs will be affected over the next 18 months as the company transitions to what they say is a greener way of working. However, unions are warning the move will be devastating for the economy and the steel industry. If you thought your shopping bags were feeling a little lighter, it could be because more and more products are getting smaller. Mouthwash, tea bags and sausages are among the supermarket staples that have been downsized thanks to so-called shrinkflation as manufacturers look to cut costs. That's according to the consumer watchdog Which. They found Listerine's Fresh Burst mouthwash shrank by 100 millilitres despite its price on Tesco shelves going up by 52%. And that means shoppers paid 21% more for 17% less. Some varieties of PG Tips also used to contain 180 tea bags. Now, at many supermarkets, you will just get 140. And railway lines across Scotland will close early tomorrow as Storm Isha brings severe conditions. Network Rail says several lines will be out of use from 7 p.m. on Sunday. The rain warning extends across the whole of Scotland, with a wind warning remaining in place until Monday morning. Storm Isha is expected to bring winds of up to 80 miles an hour in some places, coastal areas particularly at risk. This is GB News. We're on TV, on digital radio and on your smart speaker too. Now it's over to Neil.
The last of the flock of private jets will be departing Davos now, flying rats of the fourth industrial revolution, pumping out their tons of CO2 that don't matter because they're rich and above the law, carrying self-anointed world leaders and CEOs, mostly travelling solo, one private jet each, high above the common herd and oblivious to our cares. It's a fitting image, hypocrisy with wings, do as I say and not as I do, them up there and us down here. Like self-styled gods, inhabitants of a new Olympus built for BlackRock, Raytheon, Google and the like. They're lethally curious about what we get up to, but utterly casual in their approach to our lives, indeed, whether or not we have lives. We're being dictated to, having our futures planned for us without our consent by a protected parasite class that regards the mass of the world's population with out-and-out contempt, dots on spreadsheets. Beware of false prophets, for they shall make money in our name. Where before there might have been a pretence that our opinions mattered, that the will of the people was sovereign, now we are shown that the powerful will do as they please while we pay for it and keep our mouths shut. The powerful declare never-ending wars, hand vast sums of our money to others of their kind to do with as they please. They tax us only to impoverish us. Malign ghosts of the past, ex-Prime Minister Tony Blair and the like, plot with ghouls of the present in the World Economic Forum and elsewhere to watch us around the clock and so have the final say on everything we do, and for all time, as it turns out. Last week, both Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and Defence Secretary Grant Shapps spoke about how Britain was committed to supporting Ukraine in its war against Russia for 100 years or more. Oh, do you think so, lads? Did you get that? 100 years or more of having our pockets picked by the state and the cash invested in the military-industrial complex, on and on, into the lifetimes of our great-great-grandchildren and beyond, without so much as a by your leave. Since when did Prime Ministers, especially unelected and unwanted Prime Ministers of no demonstrable ability, entitle themselves to committing tax-paying citizens of the future, people as yet unborn, to the enabling of corrupt and spurious enterprises that might as well be promised to last forever? As I say, they regard us with utter contempt and no longer even bother to conceal the fact. We've apparently arrived at the point in time where those we did not vote for simply decide among themselves what forever will look like and then get about the business of making it so at our expense. And don't for a moment think the so-called opposition would do any different. A change of government means no change at all. Those self-appointed overlords feel no more obliged to seek our permission than to seek the go-ahead of the cattle in the fields or the stray dogs in the street. Human life has got that cheap. They give away our money for the slaughter of generations of people we will never know. The parasite class and their puppets care for us not a jot, but they fear us. We've learned by now that we're supposed to welcome a zero-trust society in which we are presumed guilty of something or other until able to prove otherwise. We're to be imprisoned in a cage made possible by digital IDs that, together with round-the-clock surveillance enabled by the sort of tech Rishi Sunak's billionaire father-in-law provides, the keeping of social credit scores and the programming of central bank digital currencies that will place the submissive and the unwitting into one big, world-enclosing rabbit hutch. Many will have heard of the panopticon, the prison architecture designed by 18th century English philosopher Jeremy Bentham that leaves inmates no option but to assume they're being watched at all times by guards they can't see. George Orwell had the panopticon in mind when he wrote in 1984 of an entire world turned into one dystopian hellscape of surveillance and its attendant paranoia. Quote, "There was, of course, no way of knowing whether you were being watched at any given moment. You had to live in the assumption that every sound you made was overheard and, except in darkness, every movement scrutinised." Less well known, perhaps, is that before finishing his design for the ultimate prison, Bentham travelled aboard a slave ship, so that slavery has always been in the deepest foundations of totalitarian dreams of keeping watch over untrustworthy humankind. In an increasingly frenzied bid to have us look the other way, the would-be dictators are throwing everything they've got at us. Disease X is among their latest fear porn, anonymous this time, a to whom it may concern virus, and also more mRNA, that gift that keeps on giving, ready to be injected into livestock and the rest of our food so there can be no avoiding it, and bombs dropped on Yemen, one of the poorest countries in the world, under attack from US and UK-backed Saudi Arabia for nearly a decade. Hundreds of thousands of civilians are dead there by war, disease and starvation. Are we all to be herded like cattle? And towards what exactly? Towards the end times? Certainly feels like it. Which is to be the final straw? Where is the tipping point that will have enough of us cry enough? When the warmongers launch World War III? War with Iran, which has had the hawks of Washington salivating for yet more decades? Or will it be open war with Russia, with China? Forever wars, always confidently predicted, in the same way another pandemic is apparently a dead cert. A person must wonder where all that certainty comes from. It's insane. They're insane. And we in turn must be mad if we continue to listen to them. Even the weather's against them, exposing more of their nonsense. Northern Europe shivered in a biting cold the climate alarmists didn't dare contemplate. It takes enough effort as it is to hoax the entire world about global boiling without the challenge of persuading the billions to look away from claims by some that the ice in the Arctic Sea is at its greatest extent in 21 years. And when the only record temperatures in prospect are those colder than a well digger's ass. Fortunately, there are plenty of newspapers filled with desperate declarations that the cold doesn't matter. Pay no attention to the snow and ice. The planet is still about to spontaneously combust as soon as it thaws out. The deepest cold snap for years doesn't mean anything. Newspapers that are fit only for lighting cosy fires with. Is the truth now only what those with the most money say it is? Now, more than ever, we must be on guard, because what's at stake is life itself. Among us now, riding shotgun with the rest of those committed to the anti-human agenda, are the transhumanists. For them, humankind itself has come to the end of the road, or at least to a fork in the road. Down one path lies the continuation of the species that's the greatest miracle we know of in the universe. Us. Fragile, right enough, as all miracles are. As others have pointed out, we have neither claws nor fangs, naked of fur or fleece, hearts and lungs cradled only by elegant baskets of ribs, but blessed beneath thin caps of bone with brains that comprehend time itself and that have vouchsafed the universe the opportunity to contemplate itself for perhaps the first time in 14 billion years. We're already capable of anything and everything, and yet the tech gurus with their soldering irons and circuit boards think they can do better. Down the other fork then lies the future envisioned by those who see only imperfect, incomplete, soulless lab rats available for fixing, a tinkering made possible by their patented, profitable technology. Those with that augmentation in mind have already started slipping silicon chips beneath the skins of wide-eyed early adopters. Life has been made disposable, expendable, all in pursuit of the greater good. Only psychopaths talk about the greater good. What they mean and what they want is what's good for them at the expense of others. If other lives, millions and billions of lives, must be set aside for the good of those with money and power, then so be it. So I ask again, why would anyone still listen to the nonsense of Davos man and woman and their bought and paid for stooges in governments around the world? Do you remember knowingly surrendering to a kakistocracy, which is to say government by the very worst in society? I don't. We've been mugged for our energy, for our money and for our food. Who on earth surrenders the food supply to people who never once got their hands dirty sowing seeds, caring for livestock? Those people with a penchant for private jets are not farmers in the same way that Bill Gates is not a virologist or any kind of expert in the immune system. Among the many things Bill Gates is not, he's not a farmer either, and yet he's also made himself the biggest private landowner in the United States. Is it because he wants to control the use of all those fertile acres and so what people might eat? Here's the thing, it should be obvious to anyone with their eyes open that the powerful don't care about life, about our lives. Right now, with 500,000 or more already dead and cold in Ukrainian clay, the governments of the West have more recently been shrugging their shoulders at the deaths of tens of thousands in the Middle East. It's not manna that falls from heaven onto babies in Gaza, but white phosphorus that burns them to dust. And so, pause for a moment and wonder who will be the soldiers and the casualties of the next war? Me, you, my children, your children. The fork in the road we must choose, the road down which we must walk, is one where we respect at all times the unique and irreplaceable value of human life itself. Joining me tonight is commentator, podcaster and lecturer at Webster University, Vienna, Ralph Schoellhammer. Greetings, Ralph. How are you?
Good to be with you, Neil. Fantastic to be here.
Always good to have you. Where on earth are our so-called leaders leading us?
Well, you mentioned one term in your monologue about Davos man, and if I recall correctly, this term was coined by Samuel Huntington now almost 20 years ago, and he describes Davos man as kind of a representation of this detached elite. Like for them, their own country is too small for them, so their designs are not for the countries or for the electorate that put them into power, but for the entire planet, which you saw in Davos. I mean, sometimes, and I'm sure that many of your viewers hopefully they avoided to have to do this. This is why they have asked to talk to them about it. If you watch some of those panels, the things they say, it really is dystopian. But it's always about the world. It's all these universal approaches. It's not about taking care of the individual or the smaller issues. It's about everything or nothing. And I think this is very worrisome because if we take the broader historical comparison, if you think about it, when did we have this in history? When the individual didn't really matter anymore, right? When it was about the grand design and the individual, you, I, others. We are just kind of little bricks in this grander design. We're expendable for the larger goal. This is in many ways resembling totalitarian ideologies because the goal is the true, the means justify the ends, and the ends is this quote unquote utopia that they envision. And if it costs, high sacrifice by you, by me, by others, I think they're willing to accept that.
Why? From where has come this contempt with which they clearly regard the mass of the population. How did they get there?
Well, I think the answer to this question is, if you look at what we have been teaching in the so-called quote-unquote elite institutions, in the universities, in higher education, you have created an entire class that was marinated in the idea that the nation state is something of the past, that loyalty to the area we were born with, right? The sense of belonging, that this is something of yesteryear, that this is something that only, proto-fascists or reactionaries would cling to. So they have almost a desire to detach themselves from where they come from. So how in the world can they make policy for those, right, for whom are they supposed to make those policies? Because in many ways, I wouldn't say despise, but they feel no connection to them, because that already is seen as partially a problem. It always remembers me of when Hillary Clinton was talking about the deplorables, right? And this kind of language, I think, is much more common now, that they believe there is a significant part of the population that doesn't even deserve their attention, doesn't even deserve them, kind of taken care of, if you want.
They certainly don't trust us, do they? Or they demonstrably distrust us.
No, I think we have a very good evidence for this. To give you one example, look at the average law. Like, the law texts are getting longer and longer and longer, more and more pages. I recently looked at, for example, an environmental impact study for an offshore wind farm of Norfolk. It had 14,000 pages. That's longer than all the works of Leo Tolstoy taken together. Now compare this to the Governance of India Act of 1935, which were 325 pages. Because back then the idea of the government was that we have competent people that we can trust, so we just have to give them the broad outlines, what is supposed to be done, and they can be trusted to do it. Nowadays, if I cannot trust you, Neil, and we enter into negotiations, right, we will have a contract that will try to address every possibility, because I cannot trust you to do what is in my interest, and you cannot trust me to do what's in your interest. And that's a clear sign that the government is increasingly using trust in the people. This is why we get more and more and more regulations, from health and safety to hate speech to misinformation. What can you watch on TV? What can you eat? What can we allow people to say? And I mean, we said this before the show, right? The more you only regulate those whom you don't trust. And what we experience is a government that doesn't trust its own people.
You only regulate those you don't trust. That speaks 1,000 words to me, 1,000 pages of words. First break, after which I'll be joined by farmer Gareth Wynne-Jones to talk about what's actually happening with the German farmers' protests, and big question if similar demonstrations could, should or will happen here. Don't go away.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
to find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show.
Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else.
We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride.
Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse.
It's news, but it's this close to entertainment.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now, my first guest tonight is farmer Gareth Wyn-Jones. I've spoken to him several times already on this show. He's warning now that protests witnessed across Germany could soon be here in the streets and in the fields and byways and highways of Britain. Farmers in Germany are blockading roads in protests against subsidy cuts, with more than 500 tractors and trucks parked up by Berlin's Brandenburg Gate. Gareth is here with us now, I hope. Gareth, good evening. Good to see your face again.
Evening. How are things?
Gareth, what are you keeping tabs on what's happening in Germany? Are you across that? Are you in touch with any of them?
Yeah, so we're talking with a few of the people that are involved in it. You know, it's not just a farming protest. I think we have to understand that. It's a lot bigger. There's massive public support out there for them. You know, the firemen, the police, you know, a lot of small businesses. It's about taxation and it's about bringing, you know, the public down onto their knees. It's killing it. It's killing our society across the world because, you know, we've seen it in the Netherlands, we've seen it in Sri Lanka, we've seen it in Canada. You know, we're now beginning to see it in France. This is repetitive. It seems to be just going from one country to another. It's government policy, like the Netherlands, it was the nitrate levels. Out there in Germany now, you know, they're taking the subsidy off the red diesel. Now, what people don't understand is if you take the subsidy away from the farmer to produce that food, they have to add that onto that product, which is going to cost the general public more money. And what's really annoying, Neil, is that we're not seeing this in mainstream media. We're seeing tiny little bits. You know, GB News has been really good. They've covered quite a lot of it. But, you know, this is a massive protest. It's one of the biggest protests they've had in Europe for a long time. And as a farmer, I will tell you, honestly, farmers do not go out to protest unless it's the last resort because they've got animals, they have got crops, they have got a business to run. Unless their whole business is, you know, on a knife edge, they do not go out and protest, and they are desperate. That's why we're seeing these protests across Europe.
Yes, Gareth. Now, Ralph, I feel it in the marrow of my bones that the people, I mean, the farmers are angry because they understand the predicament into which they've been put by all of this. But the people know that when you start messing with the farmers, that something fundamental is adrift. Don't you think?
No, I agree. And I think Gareth made a fantastic point when he said that farmers would only protest if really it's the last resort. And I think this goes double for Germany. There is this anecdote, I think, that kind of highlights this very nicely. In 1944, during the end of the war, the German propaganda ministry had to issue an order that the Germans who were standing at train stations, at train platforms, if the sirens were going off because British bombers were coming in, they can leave the platform and seek shelter and don't have to wait for somebody to validate their ticket. This is kind of the German mindset. Right? So once you have rules, you don't want to break those rules. So if you have German farmers, and Gareth is absolutely right, this has spread to truckers and other areas. If they go out on the streets and protest, that is the beginning of something larger. And I think what you described, Neil, is there is a sense, when we want to tie together the truckers in Canada, the farmers in the Netherlands, the farmers in Germany, it is a sense that governments are starting to declare war on the very element of the economy that keeps everything going. We're against mining, we're against energy, we're against farming. And more and more people realize, but wait a moment, isn't that keeps everything going? Not all of us can become, political commentators and Instagram influencers, because we can only do what we do because these farmers like Gareth are so incredibly productive.
Gareth, do you feel that? Do you feel as though you're at war? A war that the vast majority of the population are not being kept up with?
Yeah, let me tell you, my family's been farming this land for 375 years. I want a future for my children on this land, doing what I think is right. Yeah, there's a few problems within the industry that we need tweaking. I'm not going to hide away from that. We need to start to look at solutions for more regenerative, more sustainable ways of producing food. But don't bite the hand that feeds you. Don't ever forget that. And I'll tell you something. When you look, you are going to need maybe an accountant once a year, a dentist, a doctor. But you're going to need a farmer every single day of your life, and that's across the world. And the majority of farms across the world are family farms. These are people that are working 7 days a week, 365 days a year, to produce food to feed people affordably, and healthily. And that's the scary bit. I see these, I was listening to your speech earlier, mate, and I see these multinational corporations flying in and out of Davos, looking at us thinking, who are these? Do they want us eating bugs and processed rubbish? Let's build a better Britain on our bellies. Let's look for a farming food revolution worldwide. Let's come together as people, because this is bigger than just the farmers. This is more. And if we don't support each other going forward, we're in deep trouble. And for me, I'm never going to go hungry. I'm never going to go cold. Today I was out shooting, harvesting my own food. I brought the birds back. I'll process them tomorrow. They'll be in my freezer. They'll be feeding my family. And I want to bring something else into this as well, Neil. We're working on Farming Britain, a new YouTube channel, to share these stories. Not country lies, but the true voice of rural people. What's going on in the countryside? This is really important. So if people have the opportunity, follow some of my social media pages from Facebook to YouTube, because these are important, because we're not having a voice in other mainstream media.
Gareth,
we need that voice so people can understand what's happening. Wake up and smell the coffee before it's too late.
Gareth, do you see the farmers and the people around in the community rising in the way that they have in the Netherlands, that they have in Germany and elsewhere? Do you see the same thing maybe manifesting here in the weeks ahead?
It's not quite at that point in this country, I think, yet, Neil. I don't think it's there. But government policies in Wales, because we're devolved out here, there's a lot of problems. There's a lot of family farms that are struggling, and they're not going to make it through 2024. And I think this is across Great Britain. So I think we have to start pushing our agenda into these policymakers, into the politicians, our MPs, our AMs. They need to listen to the farmers. They need to listen to rural voices, because we're not being heard. And 84% of people living in the cities, but they'll walk into a supermarket and there'll be food on the shelves. We remembered what happened when the Ukraine war went. There was starting people thinking, oh my God, we need food security in this country. And what are they doing? Solar panels, solar farms going up. We're losing land to building. And I'm not against that. Everybody needs a new house. But we have to start to watch after our own country and our own farmers, because if something happens globally, we are going to be in trouble. Where we have a big population on a small island. And if you're going to try and feed them sustainably, affordably, that's going to be a bloody hard job, I'll tell you that.
A bloody hard job. Gareth, keep doing it. Keep fighting the good fight, and I'll speak to you as soon as I possibly can. Thanks so much for joining us this evening. Caught with another break, after which I'll be joined by James Melville, who himself comes from a farming background and feels that it's an uprising by people who feel forgotten and ignored that's coming or required. Don't go anywhere.
On Mark Dolan tonight, in a world exclusive, my Mark Meets guest is one of the survivors of the 1972 Uruguay plane crash in the Andes, where they resorted to cannibalism to stay alive. It's now a hit Netflix movie. We're live at 9. Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show.
Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else.
We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride.
Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse.
It's news, but it's this close to entertainment.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Welcome back. Now, my next guest this evening, James Melville, says that all of this is nothing to do with a far-right agenda, quite the opposite. That what is required is to see the farmers' travails as a catalyst for change. And James joins me now. Good evening, James. Good to see you there.
Good evening, Neil. How are you?
Good, good.
Yeah,
now,
good to see you.
You're from a farming background. You live in Cornwall, but you come back and forth to Scotland. What are the Scottish farmers saying? What are you hearing from that community of which you are a part?
I think it's the same issues over and over again. A forgotten community. These are blue-collar workers, effectively, some of the most multi-skilled workers on the face of the planet, and the bedrock of an economy, and they feel forgotten about. Many industries have been torn apart and disenfranchised over the last 40 years, but farming consistently has. And now we've got the additional aspect of the net zero agenda. And farmers are concerned that this is going to affect their yields, their livelihoods, and the government are completely out of touch with what the farmers' needs are. What we're experiencing in Europe, which has gone one stage further, is effectively a blue-collar rising, a blue-collar spring, because enough is enough of governments who are failing to take care of business of a primary source of the economy, namely farmers. Going back to answer your question in Scotland, they're certainly not at the stage of what the German farmers or the French farmers are doing. But I think there is the same mood, the same feeling that they're being neglected by the government. When you're getting severe pressure in terms of brokerage agreements with supermarkets, where farmers are getting pennies for their crops and their products, and at the same time governments are implementing draconian net zero measures, it's almost impossible for farmers to make some sort of profit. And what's happening beyond that is then, because farmers are under so much pressure, major corporations are coming in and plundering the land and taking the land as an asset grab. And then, paradoxically, quite often, producing more net zero solutions, such as destroying the landscapes and the environments with mass production solar panels.
James, bear with me. Ralph, is it arrogance on the part of, the decision makers? I mean, do they have a sense of how angry not just the farmers are, but the wider population? And do they care?
I think arrogance is a huge part of this, and I think James made a good point. Let me tell you a quick anecdote that I had with a Dutch farmer when the Dutch government was trying to implement their nitrogen restrictions, and they said, 30% less nitrogen by 2050, and the farmers correctly said, what do they think we are doing? Like, fertilizer is expensive. It's not that they just spread it, hither and yon because they have it for free. So they try to reduce fertilizer use anyways because it is something that they have high expenses on. But you have some bureaucrat sitting in a windowless office, who kind of looks at this and says, 30% looks like a good number, let's do it. But I think there's a second factor that James also alluded to, which is when we say forgotten communities. I mean, there's this old saying, out of sight, out of mind. And we don't give the areas of the economy, the key areas, farming, mining, energy, the attention it deserves. Maybe, I'm being facetious here, but I mean it. We have debates about quote-unquote drag queen story hour, but maybe we should have something like farmers story hour, like coal miners story hour. Maybe we should kind of imbue young people with a certain respect from where these things come from that make modern life possible, because I think then maybe we would have much more understanding and respect for the farmers and others.
James, you're saying, and Gareth said the same, that in Wales people aren't quite ready to rise, and you're saying in Scotland you don't think that people are at quite that stage. But as Ralph says, wouldn't it be almost beneficial if the farmers rose? Because the old media are not covering this, they're not drawing attention to it, quite the opposite, and they're misportraying it. Don't the people need to be confronted by the everyday reality of the farmers so that they remember they're even there and what it is that they do?
I agree with that, and on previous comments, agree with all of it. I think there needs to be, as I said before, a blue-collar rising. We've got a channel in this country. So our poll tax spirit. Remember the poll tax and what happened there. If people rise up in a peaceful way, in mass mobilisation numbers, change can happen. And it comes back to the point that was mentioned before. We've got to start raising awareness about the bedrock and foundations of our economy, and that is the producers. The farmers are the kind of root and branch, effectively, of that, and they need to be heard in Westminster. But the only way I think we can do that is to take a leaf out of the book of the Dutch and also the Germans and the French, and also going back to the Canadian truckers. And I think we need to support it. It is our job to raise awareness for this because, as you said, it's not getting enough coverage. And the last thing I would say is, ironically, this is the sort of campaign that the left used to be behind. Where are large parts of the left right now? This is not some sort of far-right protest. This is nuts and bolts of the survival of our country and many other countries, our food production and the workers that go with it. And it's not just the farmers. It's the circular economy around farming. It's the shops, it's the deliveries. All of that has to be taken into account. I remember the Country Alliance march we had, 20, 30 years ago. There was about 500,000 people descended on London. Maybe it's the time now to coordinate and galvanise our rural communities and our farmers to do something about this and vote with their feet effectively onto Westminster to make our high-polluting politicians listen to what is one of the primary industries and important industries in this country.
Thank you, James Melville. Thanks for that insight. It's always good to hear from somebody who's actually grown up in that world, so to speak. Thanks very much for your time this evening. Ralph, do you think that the ideology at the top notwithstanding, that there must be many of the elected representatives and others who know that this is madness and are they just afraid to articulate what they must surely know?
I'm not so sure if they know. You mentioned it before. Once you are trapped in a certain bubble, I think it's very, very hard to penetrate, to break that bubble. And what you would need, and that's so difficult. This is, I think, continental Europe has an advantage in some areas with the multi-party system. You need some new movements. Even if those new movements might not come into power, they do exactly what you just described. They push the existing ones, in the best case, in the right direction, or they replace them. I mean, take one example. I think James alluded to this. You have the Social Democrats in Germany, the so-called party of the working class. Not a single member of the Social Democrats or their leading part is from a working class background. So people turn to another party that they find more credible. I mean, we call them the kind of the old mainstream parties. They're currently polling at 13%. The AfD is polling at 23%. So kind of we know where this trend is going. And the frustrating thing is, exactly as James said, these are not far-right extreme positions. This is common sense. As we said, people have a sense, they feel that infrastructure is crumbling, things are getting more expensive. Like they see that, again, the basics of life seem to become more and more unattainable for so many people, and they want this to change. I think that the people are much smarter than the media, you know, the dominant voices in culture give them credit for. And this is, I think, what you and I have to do, to really give those voiceless people a voice, because they are right in what they're saying and what they are demanding.
If defending and championing the rights of farmers is right-wing, I must be politically right of Attila the Hun. I mean, I am so behind the farmer. After this break, I'll be joined by author and speaker Laura Aboli, who in May of 2020 founded the United Democratic International Movement for Awareness and Freedom, dedicated to creating a better world through awareness, inspiration and the relentless pursuit of truth. Don't go away.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride.
Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 till 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
My next guest, my last guest this evening, Laura Aboli, I encountered her some months ago now. I found her utterly inspiring when she spoke. A message of reclaiming our humanity, really, I suppose, is what it boils down to. Laura is here in the studio with me now. Good evening, Laura.
Hi, Neil. Thank you.
I'll ask you, first of all, when and why did you decide to put your head above the parapet? Because I don't think you hadn't spent a lifetime being out there addressing the public.
No, I hadn't. And the when was definitely at the beginning of the pandemic. And the why was my levels of frustration and anxiety and anger, honestly, about the things that I was witnessing. Specifically, the destruction of our civil rights and our freedom and our liberties was just getting me to get to that point of boiling, saying, I have to do something. And what that was, I had no clue, but I started just writing, you know, to express what I was feeling and to really warn people as well, because my sort of, let's call it, awakening process started a few years ago. And so I could kind of sense where we were headed. I could envisage what these vaccines were really all about, and I really wanted to warn people. So that's when it all started for me, just out of sheer frustration that something needed to be done. And I'm that type of person that says, I'll do whatever I can, right?
And where are you now? You know, when it comes to assessing, after 3-4 years, however long it's been, the ideology that's out there, what do you understand is the end game?
Well, the end game, really, and it goes, everything that you've been discussing today, and your monologue, which was brilliant, by the way, really spoke of a lot of the components that are happening at the moment, which really is about establishing a one-world totalitarian technocracy. That's what we're seeing. The problem is people cannot connect the dots to form this picture. And so we see seemingly unrelated events like the farmers' protests or transgenderism or whatever the case may be, that we're massive illegal migration, and they actually all form part of the same plan. Once you can identify that plan, it becomes really much more easy to say, oh, well, I can see why they're doing that. They want to control the food supply. Oh, well, I can see why this whole gender ideology is being spread across the schools worldwide. This is not just one nation that's suddenly having, no, it's worldwide. And that is already raising a lot of flags. And you can start to see why that is necessary in convincing us to become these semi-human, semi-robotic people under this digitalized grid that they're building. And this is why this whole push towards digitalization is happening as we speak. Digital IDs, digital wallets, you know, that will be linked to vaccination status, CBDCs. They are preparing the structure necessary for that total control.
Do you think that at the part of the story is also, when we look particularly among younger people, that there are mental health issues? What you just mentioned a bit, that it's when you break down everything that gave meaning to people in the past, and you say everything that gave meaning in the past is worthless, like it has to be different, like things have to be done in a different shape, and everything that we thought was right in the past is wrong now, so therefore do it differently. Do you think this kind of de-anchoring, if that is an English word, of coming generations kind of adds to their frustration, to their depression, to their mental issues, and then there might be even more susceptible to the things that you just described?
Absolutely. You know, when you actually identify the end goal, which is this totalitarian, technocratic reality, dystopian reality, where we're just one more thing in this Internet of Things, how do you get us there? You get us by breaking everything that gives us purpose, power, and meaning. And that's the nuclear family that they've attacked. It's completely eradicating God or spirituality from education. It's flooding the streets with drugs. It's giving the young generations no hope for a future. And so all of these things break us. You need to break the human being in order to come to that post-human reality that they're building. So there's so much has happened already in the last 50, 60 years to prepare us to that point.
Do you feel, though, that I have good days and bad days. Do you feel mostly that the tide is turning in favour of humanity or not?
It is, and I'll tell you why. This agenda that I'm talking about, that we're all becoming increasingly aware of, is a very scary, very nefarious agenda. And they have worked at it for decades, and they're still going at it, and we're beginning to see that. Now, there has been this situation where people, for whatever the reason, and I don't really know what that reason is, perhaps because it's becoming more apparent, people are waking up to what's going on. I don't like that. I don't like this. I don't like how my kids are being taught at school. I don't like this illegal immigration. Why is this allowed to be happening? Why are they attacking the food supply? Why is energy so expensive? All of these things are making people question, where are we going? Where are we heading? Now, I keep telling people we really only have two enemies, and that is fear and lack of information, lack of knowledge, ignorance. This is why they're going at censorship such a big way right now. Everything is, misinformation and disinformation and even malinformation, whatever that is. So they're really attacking the source of this awakening, which is people becoming aware of things, people becoming informed of things. And when you are informed, you make better choices. And when we make better choices, we stand a chance of saying one word with two-letter word, no.
Do you think, sometimes I think we're lucky in a sense, because there's been generations who are not challenged. And now our generation faces a challenge.
Massive
and
one.
Maybe, it's worth being here for the big one.
Well, when you actually step out of this fear paradigm that we are being fed 24/7, and we saw how badly that was during the pandemic. I think people really became aware of this constant fear-mongering from media, entertainment, you name it. Once you actually step out of that fear paradigm, because you become aware of that agenda, and you start claiming your own sovereignty and your own power based on knowledge that you've attained, then things start to change. And I think this is what is happening. And you become empowered and you think, you know what? I think I was meant to be right here, right now at this time, because I want to make a difference. Because I believe we can. You, me, you, all of us,
I think
together.
That's right. Run out of time, though. We are in the right place at the right time. Definitely you, Ralph. That's it for me this week. Thanks to all my guests, Gareth Wyn-Jones, James Melville, Ralph Schoellhammer and Laura Aboli. Thank you so much. Coming up next, it's the Saturday 5.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst. Welcome to your latest GB News weather. It's turning stormy over the next 24 hours or so. Storm Isha moving in from the Atlantic, bringing some heavy rain and strong and damaging gusts of wind across the UK. We can see it there later Sunday into Monday, tight isobars across the whole of the UK. Met obvious warnings in force. A wet and windy evening to come as well, as this band of rain slowly pushes its way eastwards, though starts to ease during the early hours. Rainfall totals, combined with some snow melt as temperatures rise across western areas, could lead to some localised flooding issues, but generally for everyone, breezy conditions and high temperatures means a frost-free start to Sunday, but generally fairly cloudy. There'll be some brighter sunny spells, particularly across towards central southern parts of the UK and perhaps northeast Scotland, but then Storm Isha moves in, outbreaks of heavy rain pushing in to the north and the west of the UK. Winds picking up by the afternoon, gusts of 50, 60, locally 70 miles an hour could lead to some disruption. And then through Sunday evening, overnight into Monday, the band of rain pushes eastwards, which will be heavy, and then some really strong and gusty winds affects northern Scotland. Amber warnings out across many northern and western parts of the UK, perhaps southeast England also seeing some very strong winds. It stays blustery into Monday, further heavy showers, and then turning very wet and windy again as we move into Tuesday. See you soon.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests, and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring